Morning. Mr. Bob Pollock from the Penn State Extension is on one line with us this morning. That means the other line is open for you. You can call 349-WCCS. It's 349-9227 if you want to talk to Bob. I told Bob if he'd come in this morning, could have had a little piece of leftover Chuck Clark retirement cake, but no, you didn't do that, did you?
No, I didn't realize that there was breakfast cake there.
There's cake. Well, it's breakfast cake, all right. There's big, thick icing on it. It's good stuff. Good stuff. All right, so, hey, what are we talking about today? We've had some really cold weather in this past week. We've had some really wet weather these last couple of days. We're going to get a little dry spell and some more wet. We're getting spring weather, aren't we?
We are, definitely. We are warming up. We've had a couple really warm days. Some March breezes at the end of April. So hopefully everything was anchored down and didn't blow away. Sometimes, we'll see some tree damage during these storms that come through, and especially when we get heavy winds. So you might have some dead branches and things that may have come down. And it looks like tonight we might
get a freeze.
The front comes through, we might go down to 32, they say. And that's been juggling all week. We started at about 37, and then it went to 35, and then 34, and now we're down to possibly 32. Although it looks like it's going to be pretty windy today, and some of that wind may even stay overnight, which might help keep the air stirred up and keep things from being damaged. But it probably would be good if you have some tender things out just to make sure that they'll not get burnt overnight. And, it is still April. And we've had...
For the rest of the day.
And you look into May here for the next 10 days or so, and it looks like the weather pattern is going to be pretty favorable. But we know that Memorial Day doesn't come till the end of May, and there's still a good chance we could get a couple dips in the temperatures, along the way in the first three weeks of May. But, we always hope that won't happen, and we're going to have clear skies and be ready to go.
Normally, I put my garden in on Memorial Day. That's when my garden goes in. But it's awful difficult to wait when you get these nice days and you see the garden sitting out there saying, "Hey, come visit me," and you have to say, "Hang on, I'm not ready to plant you yet." But are there things that I can be doing to that soil in the garden right now, in the weeks ahead of actual planting them? Are there any things that I could do to enhance the garden's capabilities for this year?
Well, in a lot of cases, because we've been deficient on moisture, especially in this area. You go to some other areas, and they're pretty close to being on track for moisture for the year. We're roughly a little over 3.5 inches below normal.
Wow!
So we're, it's been drier, and the streams are down, and you can kind of notice it. So that has given some opportunity to work the soil. We don't want to overwork it. In fact, depending on your soil type and how you've treated it over time, by adding organic matter and growing cover crops, you might be able just to do no-till planting, of transplants. Because that soil is in such good shape that it turns over easy. It's not compacted. It doesn't turn into big clods when you try to work it. So in those cases, we don't have to do much to that. And the less we do, the better, because of things we've talked about before, like soil structure is very important. And we need to have the soil particles, but then we also need to have the spaces between the particles. And that's where the moisture is held until it is either used or evaporates or percolates and leaches down through that soil profile. And then the other thing that sits between those pore spaces of all those little particles of soil and stone and all that are the air spaces. So when they're not filled with water, there's air in there. And, of course, roots need air to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And they need that moisture as well. So the more we beat the soil, whether through whatever we're doing, whether it's with a shovel or with a rototiller, the more we break those soil particles up, the finer it gets, then the less space there is for the water and the air to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can overwork it and damage the soil, and it takes a long time to fix that.
Okay, here's a question for you. You recall that over the winter we had some underground work done in our yard, and that means that there's a great big long trench that's all mounded up yet and hasn't completely settled down. And by the end of this month, I think I need to get that thing down to the point where I can plant grass seed on it and not have to deal with picking the rocks out of it and smoothing it out and everything. And it'll all be settled. What do I need to be doing now? Should I be picking those rocks out and should I be smoothing that out now, or just let it naturally do what it does?
Depending on how that was put back in that hole, and whether a lot of times when they do ditch work and things, they'll bring in a compactor, whether it's one operated by a person or a piece of equipment, and they'll compact that subsoil down in the ground. As they do those, as they put more soil in, they'll go through and compact that.
No, he did not do that.
Okay, so you have less settling in a case like that.
Yeah.
If you just push it all back in the hole, it's going to take a while. It could take a year or more for that naturally just to settle in that hole and get evened out. So you'll probably want to leave that mounded a little bit. Or you're going to be coming back a year from now and adding soil to it to level it back up, because you'll have a ditch instead of a hump there.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to hear that.
Or, you could, depending on how wide it is, and if you have a roller, for instance, that you could put water in, you could roll it and help that settle the subsoil, and then you can have a top layer on there of topsoil that is not as compacted and a better place for plants and roots and grass to grow.
Well, he has said that there is a machine he has that's going to come and it's going to smooth that baby out, and he said he'd get it toward the end of April, beginning of May. So I'm thinking that he's going to come back and do that, and I would assume then that this would settle the issue of settling.
And it's been drier, so it helps when we have some moisture in the ground, as well as some of that freezing thawing action to help move that soil around and help it settle back in place better.
Okay, one more question about grasses that I recall talking to you about last fall, and that was the planting of those ornamental tall grasses that make such lovely little bushy things, and they die back in the winter, and some people cut them back in the winter, as I recall you saying. There's not really a bad time to put any of that in, since they're all potted now, right?
That's right. We have a lot bigger window to plant things because so many of our plants that we purchase now are in pots. So that root system is contained in there. You don't have to, that's the big difference between growing it in a container and growing it in the soil, where we have to bring a tree spade in or to dig that plant out of the field. And so you're removing roots when you do that to be able to ball and burlap it. So huge difference there. So that gives us a lot bigger window to plant these plants that are potted. You still have to do a little root work with them and remove some roots because depending on how long they've been in that container, the roots will grow, because they're usually plastic. The roots will grow right around the edge and start to grow in circles. And so you got to cut that outer layer off. Otherwise, those roots will keep growing in circles, and they won't grow out when you do plant them. So we need to take
You can't just comb them down. Can you comb them down in some way?
You can, depending on how many's there. It can be really challenging to comb them out and then try to plant them and get those get soil underneath them and around them, and they've found that it doesn't hurt to shave that outer layer off, because then, or cut that off, because then they'll branch. Those roots will branch out and then grow outward like they're supposed to, rather than around in circles.
All right. Good information this morning.
So yes, spring's a great time to get things in the ground. You usually have your best availability now of all kind of varieties and species of various plants. And then the thing we need to remember, the longer we go into the summer, when we have much warmer and sometimes drier conditions, it's more the warmth and the sun that will dry the soil out. And then the plant, because of the potting mixture that it's been grown in, is usually a much lighter, peatier, even bark mix that those plants are grown in. So that dries out much quicker than the surrounding soil that hasn't been disturbed, other than what you dug the hole and planted the plant. So we have to watch those plants more closely if we're not getting natural rainfall. And then depending on the warmer it is, the more often you need to check those during the growing season, especially that first whole growing season, till those plants get established in their new home.
Yeah. All right. He is Bob Pollock from the Extension Service. You can give him a call over there at 465-3880, I believe is the number still.